Hello and welcome to our monthly series, Scaffold to Success, provided by the Carbon-Lehigh Intermediate Unit number 21. My name is Sean McAmoyle. I'm an educational consultant here at the Carbon-Lehigh Intermediate Unit. Today we're going to talk about scaffolding for specially designed instruction. So today we're going to talk a little bit about scaffolding for students with and without disabilities, both in the general education and special education classroom. And when we talk about scaffolding, we look at students with disabilities and without, and how to provide supports that we can quickly take away to increase independence for students. The example we show here is providing a level of support to students based on their need, based on where they're currently at in that skill and which goal they want to attain. So this is an example of a student riding a bicycle or a child riding a bicycle. And we see the least restrictive interventions we can put in place, maybe using a smaller bike, maybe holding onto the bike and allowing a student to go, down to training wheels, all the way down to maybe a three-wheel tricycle for those kids that really struggle. So this would show, with scaffolding would be providing a little bit of assistance and then seeing how much that student needs, in order to be successful. So what is specially designed instruction before we get into scaffolding for specially designed instruction? And really what it is instructional practices and methods the teacher uses to address the student's unique learning needs. For most of you, you're familiar with IEPs, and about 3/4 of the way through an IEP, you see that there are a section called specially designed instruction. And that typically has accommodations and modifications for a student, help them be successful on their goals and interventions. So that section kind of details what a student may need academic-wise, curriculum-wise, in order to meet the goals that are in the IEP. The individualized instruction and supports the student needs, and also determined by data that's collected on the present ed levels of performance. So why do we scaffold, and especially why do we scaffold specially designed instruction? And really, first of all, what is scaffolding? Just a brief overview. And what it is, it was developed as a metaphor to describe the type of assistance offered by a teacher or peer to support learning. In the process of scaffolding, the teacher provides various supports that can be removed as content, or skills are mastered. So if we look here, we try to look at the least restrictive interventions that are in place, or sometimes we provide the most restrictive interventions that are in place. In the world of special education, we talk about level of prompting or level of supports provided. And what we want to do is assume competency and assume independence for students. So we really only look at what barriers they have and try to provide the minimal support to help them succeed, and then pull away as we can. In this graphic on the ladder, we see independence at the top of the ladder, and that would be our ultimate goal for a student, is to attain independence. Or for a child, if you're a parent working with a child at home, the longer we provide a crutch or some kind of support to that student, the longer they're going to rely on that and need that. So the goal would be just to kind of gradually decrease the supports that are put in place in order for that independence to be accomplished. This one we see model at the bottom. That might be something that the teacher does, kind of guides them, gradual assistance, and all the way up to independence. So how do we determine, SDIs and what is needed and how to scaffold that, those specially designed instruction? A couple questions we can ask are, first, what are the students' barriers to learning at the expected level? And this is done because we really first want to look at barriers that are in place to help them succeed or meet that goal. So if the goal is a math-related goal, what barriers do they have, and then what interventions or what can we put in place temporarily to help them succeed? Most of the time in a classroom, it's good teaching. So some of those interventions or some of those scaffolds we can put in place are things that we can do for all the students in the classroom, and then remove them as we need them. The other question we need to ask is, what does the adult need to do in order for the student to reach the goal? So our job as an adult, whether it's a teacher, a paraprofessional, a parent, a related service person coming in to work with a student, really should be, our job is to look at what minimally we can provide and fade over time to help that student be more successful. And we saw with the example of a bike, we may start with training wheels, or a three-wheeler, and we may eventually, decrease the supports needed until independence is made on that goal. So again, this is, if we can answer these questions, that's how we kind of determine what specially designed instruction is needed. So again, student needs, and to try to figure out where the needs are, especially for an individual student or a classroom, what we sometimes use are some diagnostic instruments to assess those skills. And what we really want to know is, what does the student know now? So as a classroom teacher, with using scaffolds, we kind of look at the whole class and we kind of look at where they are now and then how to build in things in place that we can, assist the student in learning or meeting their goal. So some of the examples are maybe universal screening and progress monitoring data. So that might be, again, I'll use the area of math. It might be a general pre-test or an assessment that we do, a screener, school-wide screener that we look at to see where our level is in the classroom, functioning level or kind of median level, to where we can teach and provide, interventions either above or below that level based on the student need, or if we need to accelerate students as well. Could be with a pre-test. A lot of teachers do pre-tests for students to kind of see what they already know and where, students really need heavy interventions or some things put in place. It could be surveying background knowledge, and you guys are probably familiar, which I think I'll show in the next slide, a KWL chart. Could be a student self-assessment or checklist. And some of these might just be talking to a neighbor if we're, talking about history. Talk to a neighbor about what you know about different wars, and then kind of get some knowledge and, kind of figure out where students are in that. Formal and informal assessment also can be used. So we use, a variety of different formalized assessments. It could be curriculum-based assessments in the classroom, or things that are a little more formal, like maybe your Acadians assessments or STAR assessments, or even PSSA data to determine that. Then we have to be aware of student previous school data and background. So students coming into the classroom may need some more interventions, or may need some more scaffolds put in place for that student to help them succeed. We also determine their interest and their way of learning, and try to figure out what's the best way to get them as a teacher. So we talk about specially designed instruction as a way to meet our goals. This could be a classroom-based goal. So that's why we implement a bunch of different ways of learning in the classroom, which could be small group partner work, visual instruction, any interactive learning boards or things like that can be done in the classroom that we can quickly pull away as they start to learn content or learn that area. So why do we scaffold SDIs? First of all, one of the issues with creating independence in students is sometimes we provide accommodations and modifications to students that they rely on. So if we scaffold, we can easily pull those supports away to create independence with students. So especially our students that are learning new content, this is a great way to introduce new content as well. Again, when students are given more options, so if we give some visuals or things that are tangible or manipulatives to a student, there are ways that really invest them in learning a lot as well. And really, even with differentiation, it lends itself to better outcomes for both high achieving students and for those that struggle. So providing a variety of ways or techniques to use in your teaching really targets either our high students and our low students as well. So especially designed instruction, when talking about that, we have to talk a little bit about accommodations and modifications and kind of what the difference between scaffolds and accommodations and modifications are. So first, when we talk about adapting, we talk about things like the content, the methodology, or delivery of instruction. And this might be, a teacher doing a variety of different teaching techniques like computerized or small group or one-to-one intense, or doing some of those things and adapting the way things are done. Or it might just be, the delivery could be virtual versus in-person instruction, which we've seen a whole lot of. And this is really just to address the unique needs of the child based on a disability or not a disability, just learning new content as well. This ensures the access to that general education curriculum, whether you have working with students that have a disability or not a disability. Really, it's talking about access to that general curriculum and trying to make them part of the curriculum and give them some tools that they can use to access that curriculum. So most SDIs, again, kind of fall into two categories, which I said, which are accommodations, and that is changes to what the child learns and modifications, which is a change to what a student is expected to learn or changes in instructional level, content, and performance criteria. When we talk about scaffolds, we mostly fall into that accommodation group because it's things that we can quickly pull away and it doesn't really alter the curriculum or the content that we're providing for students. So just looking at accommodations, modifications, accommodations really do not fundamentally alter or lower expectations or standards in instructional level, content, or performance criteria. So it is the same content, math, science, social studies, reading, writing, whatever area you're doing, it doesn't alter that curriculum. It really just changes the order, provides equal access through different modalities and things that methodologies we're using. And regardless of the IEP, typically with accommodations, we're using the same grading system. With modifications, we're looking at it does fundamentally alter or lower the expectations of the standards or the instructional level. So with modifications, sometimes we are altering content. We're changing the way things are done. We're limiting the amount of information that is presented, which kind of alters the content as well. And a lot of times grading is very different with some modifications when we are implementing modifications rather than accommodations. Now, this is needed sometimes for students that are a lower functioning level, or students that really have some learning disabilities in certain areas. Modifications are okay, and that is what is needed for students. But for the majority of today, we're going to talk more about accommodations and how to scaffold some of those things to provide those supports and be able to take them away as we see students being more successful. So just some quick examples of some accommodations that we might see. Again, looking at students that really struggle with the reading aspect of it, we could listen to audio versions of books or just something simple like that. That could be really something that goes along with the student throughout. We're not really assessing our reading content, we're assessing our curriculum content. So this would be for maybe history or a science, or even for a math word problem kind of thing, using the audio version to help them learn the history, the science, the math, rather than actually assessing the reading aspect of it. We could be viewing a content about a science concept, and this would just be kind of an additional thing to for a student to look at, maybe a student that's more visual. We talk about using a lot of those other strategies, those kinesthetic, tactile kind of strategies, along with visual and auditory. Using a keyboard to write rather than using a pencil. Extended time on tests and assignments or large text, with sometimes what we see as part of some of those specially designed instruction that are in IEPs. When we talk about scaffolding for students, really we want to make them actively engage in the lesson. So a lot of our strategies for scaffolding are done ahead of time or done right at the beginning of introduction of content. It's making kids really want to be engaged, because myself walking into a calculus classroom, probably if everyone in that classroom is really proficient in calculus and it's my first day in the class, I'm going to feel overwhelmed with that content. So I'm going to shut down right away. If there's active engagement and we do a lot of, really good background based knowledge for that student, we look at involving everybody in the lesson, students are definitely going to be more engaged and probably have more success in that content area. So what we look at is making sure all students are responding in a safe way. These might be little things like a think, pair, share, or turn to a neighbor and talk about one thing that has to do with history or something you're interested in, just to kind of get them to start thinking about the content area and make them involved, even if they don't have a whole lot of background knowledge or content. Again, applying background knowledge, so it may not be specifically to that content or topic or area that you're doing. If we're talking about the United States of America and the map of the United States and the different states, it may be just a, tell me one place that you visited in the United States and maybe share a fun fact about that to kind of, open up your mind about being interested in the United States and in that area that maybe you thought you didn't have a whole lot of knowledge about. You can also, this is my favorite, is providing some remembering strategies for some of that information. And I still remember back to my 5th grade year, learning prepositions and learning, the planets by using some strategies to help remember that. But we use mnemonics a lot of times. If you guys remember, in 1942, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. That's something probably everyone knows and kind of remembers that date by, but using some of those teaching strategies that are really not modifications to the curriculum. They're things that you can teach and the student learns the content, and it's a memory strategy. So that can go along with them. That's what we're talking about learning and scaffolding for those students. Again, just ensuring that we have access for our students as well. And sometimes it's through things like audio books and looking at other ways for those students to access things. It could be Braille. It could be some of those, really easy things to implement that doesn't alter the curriculum, but really gain student access to those academic areas. So talking about a few types of SDIs that we typically see in IEPs, or we typically see in our classrooms, that we can scaffold and kind of pull in and out to help students. Looking through, a good strategy of preview, pre-read, and pre-teach. This is really, probably one of the best strategies to use for new concepts and introduction in the classroom. It might be, walking through a book and doing a book walk and looking through pictures and helping, sharing stories about what we think is going to be in there, kind of predictions about what's going to happen. This can happen in science and history as well. Reviewing some of the hard vocabulary ahead of time and doing some of those strategies ahead of time, that when it's time for the story, we know what those words are as we're reading. And really just allowing students time to discuss or share prior knowledge on the topic. Sometimes just that couple minutes to talk about it or to do a little research on your own and get a little more comfortable prior to doing a lesson or jumping right into it helps students feel a little more comfortable throughout. So one of the areas talking about is the environmental physical part of the classroom, and really some scaffolds that we can introduce for students there. And these are, things that we can kind of implement for students. They can kind of take them and run with them, and they can kind of, decrease the amount of support needed as they go. One thing I talked a little bit about is that talk time, and this is sharing some background knowledge and ideas. This is really, a proven strategy just to kind of give students time to talk. I know, if you're in a middle school classroom, you're probably saying giving my students time to talk is a recipe for disaster. But sometimes just if it's structured talk on a certain topic, it allows students to kind of, share what they know. And that's a good way for you as a teacher to kind of see where each student is and where some supports need to be in place. Again, utilizing some technology and visuals in your classrooms. Using some adaptive equipment, even for some of those students, some low tech equipment, like maybe adaptive paper for writing or special seating or some slant boards in the classroom to help students. We have very simple things like using a 3-rim binder and turning it over upside down, kind of makes a slant board to help a student with visual issues, or some fine motor skills, be able to access the papers and be able to see the paper for writing a little better. And then there's also some high tech things in the classrooms that are needed for students that may be part of that classroom, but really doesn't alter the content, like FM systems or computers or some online platforms that we use as well. Organizational, and this is probably one of our biggest areas that teachers really have control of in the classroom to really help students. And this really supports supports students to teach, to plan, organize, and execute tasks. So this could be like a check-in. The top corner you see there, sometimes it's a matter of keeping your materials organized or keeping, books organized or your assignments or something like that. So it could just be a simple check off, which is really a simple strategy that you can use that throughout life we all use. We all make lists on notepads for tasks we have to do. But by allowing a student to do this and have that visual reminder really helps them. Graphic organizers is my favorite for organizing content, especially in those, once you get up into the middle school, high school level, when it comes to science and history, or even writing tasks for organizing your thoughts, using that so it's not about processing all the information that's in a paragraph, but really just breaking down the content and helping students figure out what to write or what's the key areas that they need to learn. I use this in writing myself, when I'm writing a paper, I kind of do the key things I need to write and then kind of break it down into subcategories. Again, we are in a virtual world right now. So this could also help with organization by some simple things that you can implement with students that can be just done quickly. It could be a pop-up, a 5-minute alarm check on the computer that pops up, or really a link to their calendar for reminders as well. If students are using maybe a Google Calendar or an Outlook calendar to kind of help them keep things organized. They are really great techniques to implement with students that are not modifications. They're really just, things that you can implement and then quickly pull away and allow them to flourish themselves. These are just some examples of some simple graphic organizers that I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen. The middle one is the sandwich for writing and the main idea and topic sentences and some supporting details, along with a web to kind of find your main topic and then kind of branching out that way. But there are a whole lot of graphic organizers and different things that you can use. And what we recommend is using that for your whole class, not only for students that, have disabilities or maybe need those supports as part of an IEP, but it's really just best practice and good practice for all students. As you get into college, it'll help students, with that writing process or science or history processing. Testing, when we go through an IEP, a great deal of our learning support students have specially designed instruction written in the IEP for testing and for assignments. And we see a lot of the same things in a lot of our IEPs, and a lot of them are extended time or non-reading areas read to the student. That's why we recommend in a classroom, do it for all students. If it's not really a reading content area, maybe history or science or math, it can be read to the whole class to make it easier and kind of work through that. It could be an open book assignment if we're really looking at, trying to find the information. Use of some word banks maybe that we can pull out later, so the students really just understand where to find the information. If we individualize a timeline for completing a task as well, so this might just be, pace of learning. So if we have a report due, we give them a timeline of by this date we need this, by that date we need, the next thing, we need supporting details, and we need a first write on it. So some of our learners need that visual or those accommodations as well, just to kind of help them follow through on the assignments. For instructional, and again, this is a huge teacher piece, but it can also be done by support staff or paraprofessionals in the classrooms as well. So this is a development and delivery of instruction that addresses the diverse learning needs of students. So we talked about some visual strategies, but VAKT using those auditory and kinesthetic as well. So that's using manipulatives in the class, or using a whole lot of, hands-on kind of activities for students that really struggle with the reading aspect of it, but you're kind of implementing some of those other strategies that maybe their strong points. And we talked about in the beginning about looking where those needs are for students. So if a student really struggles in a certain area, that's where we kind of plan around that to provide those scaffolds in place for that student. Increase the amount of personal assistance to keep the student on task or to reinforce or prompt the use of specific skills. So again, we want to build a relationship with the student, and we only prompt or give those supports where needed in the class, and then we kind of back off as the student does well. One of the great uses is using peer buddies or using other people to help us, assist or model some of those behaviors that we see. And again, that could just be, a paraprofessional maybe modeling it, or another student doing it, or, placing students together so that you can learn from each other, kind of be more comfortable sharing ideas as well. Behavioral, and I know in one of the next video series, we're going to talk a lot more about scaffolding, some of those behavioral techniques that we need, but just some simple ones could be just a modification of rules and expectations that are made for the class. This could be cueing some behavior ahead of time. If we know we're going into an area that it's going to be quiet, then maybe giving a cue ahead of time so the student knows what to expect, so we're not dealing with the behavior when it happens, we're addressing it ahead of time as an antecedent strategy. Utilizing peers to assist in modeling of expected behaviors. So, you learn best through watching others. We learn best through, being in classrooms and seeing good teaching strategies. Same things with kids with behavior. So looking at, peers and using peers as models for expected behavior. Also offering breaks in between tasks sometimes helps. Just giving them that little bit of break to kind of recoup and get back. Maybe even using a schedule or using something that they can kind of take with them to know what's expected next to them, and then when the reward's going to happen or some free time is going to happen. You can also implement some choices in your instruction, and this really doesn't alter the instruction or alter the behavioral, uh, tasks that you want them to do. Really, by implementing choices, it could be, do you want to write with a pen or do you want to write with a pencil today, kind of thing. Giving them a little more choice in the action can really help them feel a little bit more empowered and in being independent in those lessons. In social, a lot of the classrooms at the intermediate that we work with, have students that have really high social needs. So we talk about how to scaffold instruction for social needs, because that's something that as we get into adult life, we really need to be independent with. We don't have somebody standing there telling us, do this next thing appropriately, or you need to speak appropriately, or use, a right cue, facial expression. So one thing that we talk about is social skills in instruction. And with social skills instruction, that could just really be modeling some of those tasks for the whole class. So, we make good choices in the class. We do instruction based on what's going on in the whole class. In the virtual world, this could be just some video modeling. There's some great YouTube videos out there for video modeling and conversations and kind of figuring out what to do as well socially. This is a little activity that can help with social in the class. So this is really something that can be done, and it's a turn and talk. So look at your partner, listen to your partner, be ready to speak when it's your turn. Speak so that only your partner can hear you, and turn and face the front when you and your partner are finished sharing. So really doing this as a pre-teaching kind of thing, or a teaching technique throughout the day, not only works on that academic area. Maybe you're going to talk about, history, or a history lesson that you're working on, but this also, is reciprocal, give and take on, speaking to each other, waiting your turn, and making eye contact. So those social skills can be built in the classroom throughout the day, rather than just addressing it as a lesson. And collaborative, we also have another a video training coming up on working with parents and scaffolding some communication as well. But just know that building those into your classroom as an everyday practice as well, by using some Remind apps or Seesaw apps, or communicating with parents that way on a daily basis, really does alleviate a lot of those problems in the classroom as well. We allow students sometimes to complete a daily note or write about what's going on in the classroom, just to keep their parents informed as well. So that can really be something that's good for all the students in the class, and not just students really that have that as part of specially designed instruction in their IEP. So really, students can have a new approach to being active participants in this process. So a lot of the strategies that deal with scaffolding are including your students in the process of pre-teaching or throughout lessons. It helps them be self-aware of both their abilities and where they struggle. And we talk about independence and graduating, when you graduate high school and having those independent skills, it really allows students to become responsible for, knowing what needs they have, knowing what barriers are there, knowing where their strengths are, and kind of building on that and being more independent. So if we can give them some of those tools and allow them to run with them and be more independent, it's really going to benefit them in the future. Also, be able to provide feedback throughout their education. So sometimes we don't give students a voice, and this allows them a voice. If I don't know something, I know where to ask and where to go for it as well. So what are some of the benefits of scaffolding, and why is this a really positive thing, especially with specially designed instruction? It really provides some individualized instruction as well. And I use individualized instruction loosely because it can be whole class, and that's really what the goal is, providing some instruction in the class, and then looking at where those individual supports are needed. But by doing the practices for everybody really helps enhance the classroom and make it really a differentiated classroom as well. It gives greater assurance of the learner acquiring a desired skill, knowledge, or ability. We talked about differentiated instruction and how the class as a whole can benefit from this. It delivers efficacy, and since the work is structured, focused, and glitches have been made, reduced, or eliminated prior to initiation, students can really focus on the task and focus on efficiency in completing the task, rather than all those mechanics and things involved ahead of time. Like using a graphic organizer, we're not focusing so much on looking at the content or looking at the verbiage or the words that are there. We're really focusing on what the main idea and how to build from there. It creates momentum, And that really could just be creating an environment in the classroom that really opens up or fosters knowing where barriers are and then overcoming barriers, or asking about, how to overcome barriers. So they could be those, quick interventions you put in place that really help students rather than kind of shutting down right away. It engages the learner more. Again, the example of going into a calculus class, I think if students can have some time to process and kind of figure out where they are and then provide those supports ahead of time, really can capture them and kind of, keep them engaged in the lessons. It minimizes the level of frustration as well. So, behaviors and some other social skills that we talked about, if you can do some of these strategies ahead of time and build them into your, daily practices, it really does minimize some of those behaviors. So that is it for scaffolding of specially designed instruction. Just kind of an overview of what to look for in your classroom and how to look in an IEP about maybe delivering some of those interventions for everyone in the classroom, and then maybe pulling back as students become more successful. We also, as part of our learning series, have scaffolding for the gifted learner coming up, scaffolding behavior, scaffolding communications with home. If you want Act 48 credits for this session, please log on to the IU website under curriculum instruction and look for details. The site at the bottom, the Google site, will allow you to get Act 48 credits for the sessions. Thank you for attending, and hopefully we see you at more CLIU ready sessions. Thanks.